Another application of loops is to use them with vectors. But before we proceed to doing vectors and loops, let's see how we can reference an element in a vector. By referencing, we mean only look at one of the elements, not the whole vector itself. If you remember using vectors in MATLAB specifically, we use them to represent a single data point. We've used them to represent vector notations of physics by a component in the x direction and a component in the y direction. We've also used them to represent a collection of data. In that case, it has nothing to do with physics. For MATLAB, a vector is nothing but a collection of data. If you look, there is no difference between the three examples here. Brackets and numbers separated by either commas or spaces. But what if you only wanted to access one little element? Sure, MATLAB is best known for its capability to handle vectors as they are defined mathematically. That is the strong point of MATLAB. For example, if you want to add vectors together, you do not have to program the equations for the x component and the y component. Just tell MATLAB to add the vectors and MATLAB does it on its own. That is a huge advantage of the MATLAB software. But sometimes it's necessary to reference only one of the elements. For example, in all the examples before, what if you only wanted to look at the 3, or the 4, or maybe the third value of the pressures? We would refer to as an index. Think of it as a position. The second element is index 2. The 4 was at index 1. The 3.2 was at index 3. Using this index position, we can ask MATLAB to reference only that one specific element. The syntax now involves parentheses and an index. That index must absolutely be an integer. But after that, whatever process you've already learned, you can apply. If you want to display, you would still use the fprintf command, but now you need to indicate which index you want to display. So the value at index 3 in vector 1. If you want to make a copy, maybe you want to use that fifth element in an equation, you might want to pull out the fifth element of vector 1 into a new variable. What if you wanted to hardcode a new value into the 9th position? In that case, notice how your vector parentheses 9 is on the left side of the equal sign. Just like old times, whatever variable you want to change is on the left side. It's just that the vector has multiple positions. So which position, or index, do you actually want to modify? In all these three examples, we hard-coded the index, 3, 5, and 9. However, you can of course upgrade to a variable. Maybe the user has provided a k value. 1, 2, 3, who knows? But in that kth value, you want to replace it by the 6th value. So it's not necessarily hard-coded. The index can very well be a variable. Let's do a quick basic example. Suppose a marathon runner has logged their running time in hours in a vector format. After prompting the runner which time they'd like to review, simply display it. So we want to reference one element of a vector. For example, you've ran the marathon 6 times. After asking the user which one he would like to see, number 2, the second time is actually displayed. If we run the code again and change the 2 to a 4, then the 4th marathon is displayed. We can do this as many times as we want. So let's go see in MATLAB. The marathon each time has been logged in to the vector 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You tell the user that there's 6 marathons and you ask the user which one he would like to see. So that index value is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. You can call it anything that you want. You could have called it K, you could have called it position, you could have called it marathon number. It's just a variable that we're going to use to reference the vector. So fprintf, you ran your marathon in hours. So the first value that we want to display is the actual value that the user wanted. So that's the index variable. But the actual hours, well, it depends. Right now we just have one variable, which is the vector, but it contains 6 values. So if I just did this, MATLAB would understand that I want to display all 6 values, and you're going to see the result. MATLAB displayed the 3, which was the value that I wanted to display, but then MATLAB absolutely displayed all 6 values. However, it still used our format. So the 3.2 was used first, but then there were values left, so MATLAB just used the 3.3 in this spot, and the 4.5 in this spot, but there were still values left. So MATLAB just keeps going one by one until it runs out of values, and that's why it stopped here. That's not exactly what we wanted to do, but you have to understand that if you display a vector, MATLAB will display all the values. The idea here is to reference only one specific value. So here, after the variable name, we'll introduce parentheses with the index that we wanted. And in this case, MATLAB will only go pick the second value. Or if I run it in type of 4, MATLAB will only go get the 4th value. So that's referencing one single element of the vector. To make it more friendly, you could introduce the little description, 4th, 3rd, 1st, but in that case it would require an if statement. So if the index was equal to 1, we need first. If the index was equal to 2, the abbreviation is second. If the index is equal to 3, the abbreviation is third. Else, meaning all others, would mean the abbreviation is th. But in that case, that variable needs to enter in my fprintf, and it's right there. It is a string. It would be the second placeholder, so it's the second variable here. And that would be a little more friendly. First, second, third. Don't forget to test absolutely everything. The other advantage of using vectors is that the programmer can come in and keep adding multiple times. Maybe he keeps running and running forever and just puts the values each time. In that case, we do need to change this. It depends. So we'll do %d. And we've seen this function before for strings, but it can be applied to numerical values. The length of the vector. Now, what if you try to access a value that didn't exist? How about index number 33? MATLAB would scream, the index exceeds the matrix dimensions. So, there's only 9 elements in your vector. Don't try to access 10 and above. That would be the usual error message we see. Remember also that it needs to be a whole number. The subscript, so the index, must be real positive integers. But this is how you reference one element of a vector. Again, you would see the vector's name first, and then the parentheses and the index that you wanted. You can hardcode the index, or you can use a variable. This is useful to reference existing value within a vector, but also to create vectors one element at a time, and that's the application of loops. So that's the next tutorial.